Good morning. It's an honor to be here with Christian leaders among us, and I want to ask us to open our Bibles and take a look at 1 Peter 4:12. And just this one verse for now. We'll look at through the book of Hebrews a little bit later. 1 Peter 4:12 says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." I have been in pastors' meetings in different places around mostly the Midwest over the last year, and what I am hearing from pastors and other leaders is that there is a rising awareness that we are coming under a fiery trial like we have not seen. Do we sense that here among the folks here? And this is an international conference. I'm thinking specifically of my familiarity level, which is the United States, but I think it's actually even greater in other parts of the Western world. But are we seeing an increase in opposition, hostility? Okay. It sounds like enthusiastic agreement. I don't know how you... Enthusiasm might be the wrong word. Emphatic agreement. Yeah. We are. My friend George Yancey wrote this book a few years ago, actually. So Many Christians, So Few Lions. He's a sociologist at the University of North Texas. He's a Christian, but he wrote this with a and he did the study as sociologists do, with studying through survey research and studying what people have actually written. And what he has found, and it's really quite clear, is that this hostility is particularly concentrated among the elite. That is, white, wealthy, well-educated males. So it's not that many, perhaps, but there are in positions of power in education, media, some in government, and the influence that they have, unfortunately, is strong. And the anger, my goodness, you get people saying things like, the only positive thing Christians, can do is cease to exist. I wish I could eliminate them from the universe. And you get people saying Christians, by nature of their belief, show a level of irrationality, that they should not be allowed to participate in public debate. This is an increase. This is different. I believe that we are the generation that is most primed, most prepared to disobey 1 Peter 4:12, to be surprised, in other words, as if it were something strange. Christians throughout history and in many parts of the world today are experiencing it as a normal thing to be under persecution and under hostility. Americans and others in the Western world are experiencing it as something new and strange. When I was in college, we had Bible studies, and I remember one conversation in particular where we were talking about persecution in the Soviet Union, which of course existed then. And the question came up, could persecution ever come to the United States? And our answer, we agreed, was, yeah, theoretically. But I can't imagine it. And we could not imagine persecution ever coming to the United States. Well, is it persecution? Yes. And my authority on that is Jesus. Matthew 5:11. He says, "Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil falsely against you on account of my name. For you are blessed, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." He used the word persecution in terms of revile and saying false things against us on account of his name. That's persecution. It's not, obviously, not to the same degree that some of our brothers and sisters around the world are suffering. Maybe even some people here in your home. But what makes America different today is the flip. There is no generation of Christians in all of church history, I believe, that has gone so far so fast. from you go to church in order to be well respected in the community, at least. And Christian morals were considered the basis for the country's morals, for law, for behavior in school. Christian morals were respected and honored. If Christ himself wasn't honored, at least the morality was. That has flipped so fast. Let me ask you a question. How many of you people would, the transgender revolution, how long has that been hot in America? How many of you would say it's been going on, say, 10 years? How many would say it's been going on 5 years? It hit in July of 2015, 4 years ago. The world has flipped in 4 years and happened on the cover of Vanity Fair when Bruce Caitlyn Jenner was featured there. And then very soon, just months after that, in Charlotte, a bathroom bill was passed allowing transgender or anybody really to choose the bathroom of their preference. The state of North Carolina responded with HB 8 saying, Charlotte, you can't do that, and it exploded. And that's really recent. It feels like it's been forever because it's so dominating in our culture. But it's recent, it's fast. So we are in a unique situation, especially in America. We have no Christians in history have been so prepared to be unprepared for the fiery trial. So my question is, how do we get equipped? What does it take? And so the questions that come to my mind, and this is where you've got notes, I hope they got passed down the aisle, and because you'll need them, especially when we get into the book of Hebrews for a quick overview, because notes are in the center seat. Christians under persecution, what do we need? We need a living connection with God. That's basic to everything, isn't it? We need a connection with God through Jesus Christ. We need to be living holy lives so that they cannot accuse us. By the way, that's the next verses in 1 Peter that I didn't go into. We need an authentic witness. We need to be speaking truth with love so people can understand who it is that we follow and why. We need fellowship and community to pull together. We need the strength of each other. Now, these are basics. This is not just what we need while we're under persecution. This is what you, if you've been pastoring, have been preaching for a very long time. And some preachers preach the two things that I would say are missing from that list of what Christians need while we're under persecution. And I get this on biblical authority, I believe, based on the example in the book of Hebrews. The Hebrew Christians to whom this was written, we do not know who wrote it. If you do know, please take my place on the podium and publish the book. You'll be rich. But we don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews. But we do know something about the readers, the people who received the book, the letter. And we know something about it, for example, in chapter 12, verses 3 and 4. He says, "Consider him, Jesus, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted." So we have the information there that they were in danger. They were at risk of growing weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, it continues, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Well, it sounds like they're under some kind of serious pressure. They haven't died for their faith in that location, in that community yet. No one's gone that far. But they're under some strong pressure. From the rest of the book, and by the way, from this point on, for the next few minutes, I'm going to be preaching to leaders, not as if I gave this talk in your church. Oh, I wouldn't, because I'm going to go through Hebrews so fast that you can follow me. You've studied Hebrews, or you can take these notes and go back and and get there after the fact. I wouldn't teach this to an ordinary church congregation, but your leaders. So, we know that the people who received the book of Hebrews were Hebrew Christians. They were Jewish. And they were being pressured by their community, is our best guess, to revert to Judaism. And you know what? The pressure would have had to have been strong. I think of the questions that they would have been asking. The people who had already expressed faith in Christ, they would ask questions like these. And these are in your notes. This is so different. This Jesus thing is so different from everything our heritage and culture has taught us. And by the way, we're following the Bible, the Tanakh, what we call the Old Testament. We've got God's authority for the way we've been following God. How could it be true that Jesus is the way now? They had questions. They had questions like, is following Jesus really worth it when people are pushing on us? Questions like, what's this faith thing? I never heard of faith. You come to God by faith? I thought you came to God through, appearing for the sacrifices or whatever. And now you're making faith such a central thing. I think that the faith chapter in Hebrews 11 has, it teaches us a lot about what it means to have faith, but it's also answering a question for them. What's this faith thing all about? It's so new. They would have been wondering, why, if this is so right, if this is just so right, why isn't life going any easier for us? And so the author of Hebrews went, and you can follow me. I'm going this Reader's Digest condensed version here. He answers these questions, and he answers them beginning with a great overview. This is just a magnificent passage, the first several verses of the book. Pardon me. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Okay, if you want to know the answer to the questions here is, how could it be true, and is following Jesus really worth it? There it is. There's your answer. But he doesn't just say that and go, okay, you're good now, right? He builds a case. He builds a case for the supremacy of Jesus. And he starts with the angels. The rest of chapter 1, Jesus is greater than the angels. And so that's a good thing. The angels, they're messengers of God. But that's not enough. Okay, he's greater than the angels. We also see in the book of Hebrews that in verse 14 of chapter 1, they're ministering spirits sent out for the sake of those who inherit salvation. In other words, they're there for people, for humans. So greater than the angels, yeah, great. So what? That's good, but keep going. And he does keep going. And he goes on to, Jesus is greater than Moses. You'll notice I'm skipping some things on purpose here because the part where he's building the case is in these sections. You could phrase it or you could locate it slightly different, but it's about in this approximately chapter 3. He says, Jesus is greater than Moses. And now when you talk about someone being greater than Moses, you're getting the Hebrews' attention. He says, Jesus, chapter 3, verse 3, Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has than the house. Whoa, Jesus is greater than Moses? Goes on, chapter 4, Jesus is greater than the high priest. Jesus is greater, chapter 7, greater than Abraham. Now we're really talking about supremacy. And he's giving reasons. He's explaining. The part about Abraham in chapter 7, we don't have time to get into it, but it basically is saying that Abraham actually was giving tithes to a priest named Melchizedek, after whom Jesus comes in the same order. You'll have to study yourself. But what I'm saying is he's giving reasons. And then he gives reasons to recognize that Jesus is greater than the old covenant. His sacrifice is way better than the Old Testament sacrifices. The priests used to stand daily at the altar ministering, offering sacrifices. Jesus gave his sacrifice once and sat down because it was done. He gave reasons. And then he goes on, chapter 11, I already mentioned this. He explains how faith fits in. Faith is not this new invention of the Christians. It's been part of biblical religion from the beginning. And in chapter 12, he says struggles are not a sign of God's displeasure. It's a sign of God's love, because he disciplines as a father disciplines a child. Now, that's the fastest survey of Hebrews that I hope you ever go through in your life. But I'm trying to make a point here by doing it in summary form, which is that he's building a case. He's giving reasons. Sprinkled in there are multiple warnings and exhortations, one of which we'll detail in a moment. But he's saying, because this is true of Jesus, because Jesus is supreme, my goodness, Jesus is supreme. Thank God. He is. I've been studying Jesus in particular and working on a book on the extraordinary nature of Jesus. And I've got to say this. Do you have any idea how outrageous our belief is? In this sense, we believe, and if you go to the secular person and you tell them to believe in Jesus, that you're telling them a man who lived 2,000 years ago, wearing a robe and sandals, walking dusty robe, gathering some few followers, is the person on whom everything depends. All of history, all of your destiny, all of every individual's destiny hangs on this one man, rests on his shoulders. What kind of a man could carry that weight? Someone extraordinary. Well, you need someone like Jesus. He's worthy of worship. And the more I study him, the more I think the doctrine of his deity justifies his worship, but I look at his character, his love, his brilliance, his power, his death for us, and it drives me to my knees. It says, you are great, Jesus. But he's building a case here. And so what he's doing, if you flip over, is he's giving them truth, and he's giving them reasons to believe. Let me put it in technical terms. He's giving them doctrine and apologetics. What the author of the book of Hebrews wanted the Hebrew Christians to receive, because he thought it would help them in their time of pressure, which is similar to what we're in now, is doctrine and apologetics. Now, if we add that to the list of the four things I gave at the beginning, this is part of basic discipleship still. This isn't just because we're under pressure. This is discipleship of the mind. The words relating to know, study, teach, and learn. I did a count. Thank God for computers to help. But I eliminated just incidental references. Words that really substantively relate to knowing, studying, teaching, and learning occur 1.5 times on every page in my New Testament. More than any other theme in the New Testament except faith. Discipleship of the mind is part of the church's responsibility. So, how are we doing at this discipleship of the mind, this sense that we can build confidence in the truth of Christianity and know what we're talking about? Well, first of all, let me just ask you, how would it help? Just call out, how does it help us when we're under persecution, hostility, whatever word you want to use for it, to have real solid grip on truth, first of all, the doctrine of the faith? How does that help us stand firm? Any thoughts? Hope. An anchor that passes with, you're still in Hebrews, thank you. Yeah, so it's firm. It's within the veil means where God is, essentially. It's metaphorical for that. Would you agree? Okay. Other thoughts. How does truth help us, the doctrine help us stand strong? Pardon me? Focus. Focus on what's right, what's true. Confidence. Solid in the midst of the storm, not tossed to and fro by winds of doctrine. Right. And it doesn't change. So we don't have to go, well, okay, I believe this, but now I'm not so sure. Because I'm not sure that what was true before is still true. Yeah. How about apologetics? Confidence in reasons for the truth. How does that help us stand strong? I already used one word, confidence helps. Yeah, give a defense for the hope that lies within us. So when someone says, why do you believe? You don't stand there and go, well, because mom and dad, or because I used to go into church. Because those answers don't work. A college student goes to the first time he meets somebody on campus and they say, go to this party, and he says, well, I don't believe in that. And they say, why not? And he says, well, because mom and dad. They're going to say, well, yeah, mom and dad don't live here. Prof says, Jesus is just, this actually happened. A biology prof said to our daughter, Jesus probably didn't live, and if he did, he might have been a stoner. The biology prof was out of her field at that point. But you need a sense of not just what's true, but why it's true, because otherwise you can just get knocked right off your feet with it. And it's happening. People are falling away from the faith, especially young people as they leave homes. The latest numbers are 66%, a study out of Lifeway Research. Youth walk away from the faith when they leave home. Some of them come back. In terms of doctrine, how are we doing? Well, there was a study came out of Ligonier Ministries, and I think I put on your notes, thestateoftheology.com would be the place you could go to look this up. 60% of evangelicals would affirm the belief that religious belief is a matter of personal opinion. 60% of evangelicals think belief is a matter of personal opinion. It's not about objective truth. Half of evangelicals agree that God accepts the worship of all religions, including Judaism and Islam. 42% would disagree with this, that only those who trust in Jesus Christ alone as their Savior receive God's free gift of eternal salvation. In other words, almost half of evangelicals think that Jesus is optional. 58% think Jesus was the first created being by God, that Jesus is a created being. That's good, solid Mormon theology, by the way. It's not Christian. We're not strong on our doctrine. So he gives them truth. He says, this is who Jesus is, and this is who Jesus is in light of what you have already known from God's Word. And he gives them reasons to believe it. Apologetics in Hebrews, yes, it is a book of apologetics. If apologetics means building a case, reasons to believe, reasons for confidence in Jesus, then the book of Hebrews is the first extended book of apologetics that we have. You could maybe argue Romans is too. It's in the Bible. It is the Bible in large portions of it. We need to be teaching it. He gives them exhortations and expectations too. And here's where it gets really hard. I'm sorry, but I'm quoting somebody else here. Hebrews 5:11. He's been talking about Melchizedek. And Melchizedek isn't so much the point here right now. But he says, about this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain. Why? Since you have become dull of hearing. I'm afraid that sounds awfully familiar of American Christianity. And I can only speak for what I know. It might be true elsewhere. Dull of hearing, for though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk, not solid food. For everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a child. Picture this. If this sounds familiar to the church, you also have to recognize that they didn't serve milk in bottles. This is an infantile religion. We need to be learning, studying. There's a reason God gave us his primary revelation in the form of a book. He calls on us. Well, I was talking with a pastor once about this, about apologetics in particular, and he's my own pastor, and I said, I hate the thought that people in the church there are people in the church who are, another friend calls apologetics weenies, geeks, intellectual, don't get it types of guys. And I said, I don't want to convey the impression that we know more than you do. And he said, looked at me, he was driving, but he looked at me and he said, well, you probably do. And I looked back to him and he said, I don't have time to study. Does that sound familiar to anybody here? This is I could leave right now and say, good luck with this. And, there's three great ways to make a person feel guilty. The first two great ways to make a person feel guilty in a message is, how's your prayer life and are you doing evangelism? Here's a third one. Yeah. What I want to tell you is that we need this, and I want to introduce it as the idea that apologetics and doctrine, discipleship of the mind, are basic. And we ought to be thinking in these terms, and we ought to be taking seriously exhortations like we get in Hebrews, that this is important. That what we need to stand strong in times of struggle is the same thing we need anyway. A living connection with God, holy living, authentic witness, fellowship and community, sound doctrine, apologetics, and some good exhortation from up front. And set the standard and set the expectation. Raise the bar. We are responsible leaders. There are challenges, there are barriers, there are roadblocks. It's not easy. Nobody's going to say it's easy. It's a process. It's going to be turning a very large ship if we make any progress on this in a new direction. How do we get started? What I want to tell you is just by way of encouragement. As I've been talking with pastors, like I said I was, and here too, I'm working on a project called the Spiritual Readiness Project, and there's brochures in the back where Sarah's sitting. And it's a two-phase project. First, phase one is listening. I want to hear from people who are doing the pastoral ministry. I've got the assumption that we need to be doing a discipleship of the mind. I need to hear from people who are in pastoral ministry. What will work for you? If someone could provide something for you that would serve your needs in your position, in your situation in the church, what would that be? What would it look like? And what I'm hearing is that we need simple, turnkey, here's what you're going to study to get the quickest possible introduction and maybe even to preach. And we're working on this in the Spiritual Readiness Project. One example of it is Critical Conversations, book that is really, it says for Christian parents, it's for any Christian leaders about how to understand homosexuality and answer key questions laid out, scripted virtually. And there's more of that coming. So I've got website there for you, the spiritualreadiness.org and thinkingchristian.net. So I leave you with this. There is hope. We can maybe not turn the whole ship, but we can encourage our own spheres of influence, our own churches, our own communities, people for whom we are doing chaplain service. Call them to a higher standard in terms of being confident in the truth. Call them to a higher standard of understanding how incredibly great Jesus is, so that we can stand firm joyfully in him. And I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people available to help. So keep your eyes open. At spiritualreadiness.org, we're doing what we can to help. Please encourage your churches and your friends in these things.